Well, it was many years of thinking because I read Brian Greene's book and talked to him for about 4 years before actually going into the studio and starting. And, there's so many ways you can think about a subject like this. You can have video projections, you could have a narrator, you could try to illustrate different concepts. And I ultimately thought the most interesting thing I could do was to hone it down to these really elemental ideas that dance could express, and that would be a really raw, sort of visceral experience of these ideas rather than something more intellectual, even though the intellectual content is certainly part of it. It's very sensual, it's very visceral, and it's something the audience, I think, gets immersed in. So once I decided that, it was really, okay, twisting, that's going to be relativity. So all the dancers, we worked on movement that's just really twisting. And then with quantum mechanics, as I said, making one phrase and then having the dancers interpret it in all these different ways. So there's a great variety that comes out, and they contributed a lot with their own imaginations. And then for string theory, again, this idea of this dense cloud-like movement that you can see from all different angles. It's almost like cubism in motion. With a Picasso head, you might see three noses on different sides of one face. And in this kind of dance, you're seeing the movement from all different sides. So what was interesting is how can something like theoretical physics helps you to think outside the box, to think of new ways of creating movement and how you use time and space, because that's what dance is, after all, is time and space. So it was a very rewarding, because it was incredibly creative and turned out kind of erotic and beautiful and a happy experience. Well, Three Theories opens with the Big Bang, which is just kind of the unleashing of matter and energy into space. That's a short section. And then the first section is relativity, the oldest of the theories from the 1920s. I've sort of smashed general relativity and special relativity into one idea. And this is done to Carnatic classical music from India, which has a different scale. So it has this kind of almost warping or twisting sound. And because Einstein said that gravity is the warping and twisting of space-time fabric, I thought, well, I'll make all the movement that's based on warping and twisting, and then that sound in the music helps to convey that, because normal dance is all vertical and horizontal. So this is, lots of curves and twists and things that come from a different sense of geometry than traditional dance. Then we get to quantum mechanics, which is done to a score that was made especially for the ballet by Rhys Chatham, and it has 100 electric guitars and drums. So it's very intense and wild and has, driving, volatile sort of rhythm. And there the dance is off balance. It has lots of non sequiturs, blackouts. I took one phrase, which is based on the quantum idea of sum over paths. And sum over paths means that to go from point A to point B, every possible trajectory is taken by particles. So every path is covered. So I made one phrase of movement and then made the dancers interpret it in many different ways. So this entire 30-minute section is pretty much based on like a minute and a half of movement that is reinterpreted. And the music does the same thing. So that's kind of the quantum section. And then string theory is done to a beautiful piece of music by the Alaskan composer John Luther Adams for two pianos. And it's kind of dense, geometric, cloud-like music that rises and falls. And it feels really new. It feels like a different sense of structuring music. And for string theory, I wanted something that felt, deeply classical, but completely unconventional. And this music does that. And the dancers do a very similar thing. They're moving together, and yet each one is sort of doing their own thing, and yet it's visually coherent, and the group sort of makes these big geometric formations, because we think that strings are in string theory, they think that strings are the fundamental particle in the universe, that, the smallest piece of matter is this vibrating string, and it takes these dense folded geometries that surround the string to create the vibration. So the dance has these dense cloud-like geometries, and emerging from it are single dancers who are like kind of a single string, and order is sort of emerging from disorder in keeping with that theory. So there's, these other layers that make it into an experience that is kind of unlike anything you probably have ever seen.